Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And I am so pleased to introduce my guest today, who is Stephen Taylor. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Anna. Lovely to be with you.
You've written a most beautiful book called The Humoral Herbal. And so we're in the realms of medical astrology here because you are also a herbalist. And I think it would just be, it's such a wonderful opportunity to discover a bit more about how the humoral system evolved. Um, because your book is brilliant explanation of that in many respects. And I've just been watching a talk that you gave as well on this subject. And I thought, we've had two wonderful medical astrologers on, Elizabeth Brooke and Marcos Patchett. But I never did ask the question, how did it all start?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, isn't it? How many decades have we got to explore and wonder how many lifetimes must be returned to complete a full and proper answer to this question? Um, yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is it has evolved from nature. So it's really evolved out of our experience as being part of nature. And the system that we're using and communicating is really just a verbalization, if you like, a way of talking about nature that helps to put us, plants, life experience, the cosmos, absolutely everything into the same picture. And that's really where humoral philosophy and language evolved from. So, I mean, I suppose if you want to be, exact about how does that timeline work, as far as the written timeline works, it really begins with the Corpus Hermeticum, obviously written, completed about 200 AD or something. But that was really the written documentation of, I suppose, the cultural and social mystical mind view of most of the sort of European, Eurasian cultures of the time. And I think they were really just verbalizing and starting to put into a written system and a sort of, I suppose you could say, what's the best word? Some kind of template, um, the entirety of how they experience nature. So I'd say the essence of it, when we talk about humors are directly connected to the elements. And the elements that we're talking about are not the periodic table of elements. It's talking about those basic things that we perceive as living, feeling beings. So simply hot, cold, wet and dry, air, earth, fire and water. And using that language of perception of how we experience the world, um, to bring everything together. So, we're all from, and this evolved in a part of the world that is a temperate part of the world. So we have 4 seasons. And of course, it makes sense then to align each of those elements with each of the seasons. And then what you find is that when that is then applied to the body, applied to the life, so applied to the day, these different aspects, these different elements can be seen to be part of this sort of 4 elemental system. And the second thing I would say is that aside from the observation that we could feel and we could sense nature through it being hot, cold, wet and dry, the other main way that we sense nature is through the experience of its cycles. So every day is a cycle. Our life is a cycle. The year is a cycle. And with humoral philosophy and how it really starts to play with astrological symbolism and concepts, is that in the same way, you've got this continual cycle of planets, you've got the cycle of the sun and the moon, and it was all seen as part of this interconnected cosmos. And in fact, the word cosmos, coming from the ancient Greek, its original definition within ancient Greek is the harmonious interaction of all parts. So the cosmos was always thought of being in this amazing harmonious interaction. And humoral philosophy and descriptions of health and disease and the plants and everything else we fit into it is really just a way of talking about those cycles and understanding how we relate to them and how we may benefit, how we can use them for our own benefit, or bring us back into cycle when we've lost it. It's a beginning, isn't it?
And I think that's wonderful, because everyone listening to this is familiar with the elements. And as astrologers or people who are interested in astrology, we know that it's all about the seasons, and it's about our relationship with the sun. So it's about how we experience life on this part of the world because of our relationship with the sun and seasons. So and of course the whole of astrology evolves as an observational exercise, noticing the relationship between the sun, the moon, us and the moon, us and the sun, us and other planets, etc. It's all part of the same thing. And so here we have it, this connection between the seasons and the humoral system. So can you, for those who are new to this concept, tell us something about, I was going to say a little bit, because it's a very complex and nuanced system, but I think that there are simple ways of thinking about the different humours in connection with the elements. So perhaps you can give us a little bit of a snapshot.
Yeah, so the humours are the manifestation of the elements within the body. So very simply, we've got the four humours. We would maybe start off with the sanguine humour, the blood. I would start with that one because the old herbalist said it was the principal humour, not because it was better or greater, but that it was within the blood that all the other humours were carried in the body. So the blood humour, which is obviously associated with the air element and is considered to be ruled by Jupiter. And within the body, the humour has a seat, and that seat is also the liver. So the seat of the sanguine, the blood, humour is in the liver. The sanguine humour as well, it has a temperament, so that would be its manifest qualities, which is hot and moist. So it would be said, when we breathe out onto a cold surface, you get moisture condensing. So that would show that there was moisture within air itself. So it was considered to be hot and moist. And that humour, the lovely thing about it is that as soon as you introduce that idea into the body, you see that it not just connects with the liver, but it also connects with the blood. And also it connects with a certain aspect of life. And traditionally it's associated with youth, because Jupiter is all, and the air element is about expansion. And of course, when we start our lives, we grow and expand, we embrace everything. That means that as soon as you mention the sanguine humour, you're already talking about an emotional state, one of being, ebullient and embracing, joyful. But yeah, a bit up and down because it's associated with air and wind, and it can be like a raging storm, or a gentle breeze. So immediately you've got the idea just from that linking that humour with the air element and how that might be seen to respond and act within the body. And within different parts of the body, also how that humour plays out. So, for instance, in the brain, the air element was considered. Well, we still talk about the ventricles of the brain. So the idea that ideas were moved in this in a form of wind around the brain, and actually that movement and that discernment, that taking out of good ideas and getting rid of bad ideas, was also associated with Jupiter and the liver. And so, for instance, within the brain, it was said that the middle of the brain was the judgmental part that was a bit like the liver, which judges between, toxins and nutrients. Good ideas and bad ideas in the middle of the brain was also under the rulership of Jupiter and associated also with that element air. So you can start to see how the interconnectedness extends throughout the whole system. And then, of course, we get fire next, which would correspond to summer, wouldn't it? And so the air element being the spring, and like at the moment, everything's growing and expanding. And then you move into summer, the fullness of everything, when the sun is fully there. And of course, the summer ruled by the sun, although that's also shared with Mars, a fiery planet, and within the body that rules the choleric humor. And we've all heard about choleric people who go around being angry, being stressful and shouting. Great leaders, great inspirers, really focused, all that great stuff. So when you start to see that in the body, it's associated with adulthood, and its seat was in the gallbladder. The gall, we think of the hot gall. That's all of the acids and those things called lipases and proteases that break down fats and proteins, and they all get concentrated in the gallbladder and then squirted out. So associated with the digestive heat. And then in the brain, for instance, that sun energy, that fire energy, that choleric energy was associated with the front of the brain, where we would apprehend ideas. And so it was also associated within the body of the faculty, which was called the apprehensive faculty, which also enabled us to apprehend nutrients out of food. And that's the effect of the digestive heat from the gallbladder. And then, of course, as we move through summer and the sun starts to get lower in the sky and it gets colder, we move into the melancholic or the earth humor associated with Saturn and with aging and with middle age, where hopefully we kind of settle down a bit, get a bit more rooted, done all that running around, done all our hard work, and now we start to bring everything back in. And so obviously associated with middle age, and interestingly in the brain associated with memories. So it's the earth element in the brain, is the memories at the back of the brain. And as we age, of course, unfortunately, as our brains cool down, we haven't got quite enough movement and activity in the brain to keep those memories coming up. They all get stuck. And then finally, as we move through autumn into winter, which would be considered as associated with water element, the moon, also Venus, and the phlegmatic humour in the body. And the seat of the phlegmatic humour is the lungs. Obviously, isn't it? The lungs are, lots of wetness, and we cough up mucus and water. So we can see these connections. And with old age, the time when the body starts to, become more swollen, we may suffer from conditions of edema. We may get, what they call dropsy, which was heart failure. So, you get swellings behind a failing heart. So again, it fits in with the cycle of life. And within the body, interestingly, each of those humours will also correspond, as we've said, to different aspects of the anatomy, but also different aspects of the functioning of the body, and they used to be called the human virtues. And there were simply 4 of them. So with Jupiter and that lovely kind of growth and expansion and the nourishment in the blood, the digestive faculty, the digestive virtue, which breaks everything down, exactly what the liver does. And then the apprehensive that we've also spoken about, which is the virtue associated with the fire element. And then the retentive, we've got to retain this stuff to make good blood. And that's associated with the melancholic and the earth element. Of course, it makes sense, doesn't it? It's in the earth. And that's with the the seat of that in the body is the spleen. And then finally, the phlegmatic, the water element, is associated with the expulsive virtue. So the cleansing virtue of the body, the one that clears and cleanses us of debris and waste products. So the elements are interrelated on every level within the body, physically, emotionally, psychologically.
When I was watching your talk, I was reminded of ether. And the thing that I thought was fascinating is the role that ether actually plays. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Hang on a second. I wonder if I can just bring you back. Sorry, I've just disappeared off the screen myself. I was trying to do a bit of a share. Sorry. Just excuse me for one moment. Hang on, there we go. Good, yes. Ether. So ether's often something that people get really confused about, isn't it? Because it seems, this idea that it's an element, but it's not an element. But it is related, obviously, to within planetary astrology and within humoral medicine. It mainly concerns. Now, some people do add the extra planets, but it's mainly concerned with the seven, classical planets. And of course, Mercury, in a sense, is I suppose, let's just say, I don't know, it's the magician that holds it all together. So, of course, Mercury is associated with Hermes, and that goes back to Hermetic philosophy. But the idea really with ether is that in the old idea of the what was known as the three worlds viewpoint, which I'm sure you're all aware of, that what connects all the different worlds, all the different levels from the divine light itself, the angelic realm, the celestial realm of the planets, and the mundane world is ether. And that's under the rulership of Mercury. So the first thing you think about, well, to do with connection. So in the body, ether is specifically related to the nervous system. And in particular, it's related to what was known as the animal spirit. So that's the energy in the body that animates us. So, and one of the ways that was understood is that, the nervous system, they understood that we felt things. We could feel hot and cold and wet and dry. And if the brain, if that animating energy was under the rulership of fire, how could it perceive water? How could it perceive coldness? So it had to be something that wasn't fire and wasn't water, because if it was water, and they say that, for instance, the temperament of the brain is actually cold and moist. So the temperament of the brain, the physical brain itself, is associated with water, but the animating energy within the brain is associated with ether, because it's only ether that can be in everything, connect with everything, and not change it, and not also be changed by it. So ether was considered to be particularly central. And, you think about how, that lovely, we think of the glyph of Mercury with the moon on the top receiving the divine light. And then we have the circle beneath it, which is representative of the sun, but also the heart in the body. And that's so the heart was seen as the celestial vehicle of the sun in the body. And then at the bottom, of course, we've got the cross of matter, showing how ether connects everything from that world of intellect and ideas, the angelic realm, into the world of soul, will, the celestial world of heart and vitality and life force, and finally then manifests in the physicality of the body. And it's ether that brings all of that together. So ether is very important. We've got some etheric herbs. We've got a few etheric herbs which really connect nicely with this. And maybe one of them is one of my favorite stories about an etheric herb is connects with the story of Prometheus. And I don't know if people how well people know the Greek myths, but it's one of my favorite stories. I love this. Do you know the story of Prometheus? I just
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
And it's got this lovely plant connection. So we all know that Prometheus, the name Prometheus means forethought. And Prometheus was this amazing titan who realized that when that great battle took place between the earthbound titans and the heaven-bound gods, the Olympic gods, that when that great battle took place, Prometheus, of course, knew because he had forethought that the titans were going to lose. So, of course, what did he do? He sided with the gods, didn't he? And of course, survived. And in some of the creation stories, of course, it's Prometheus that made us out of clay. So he had a particular concern for us. And he was always mediating between the Olympian gods and the earthbound mortals who he saw as his sort of, little creations. And one day, of course, Zeus was really upset because he was pretty fed up with these mortals who weren't behaving very well. And every time they sacrificed a bull, they kept all the best bits of meat for themselves. Now, Zeus, he didn't like that because Jupiter, he's got to be king, and wasn't going to go for that. So he said to Prometheus, "Well, look, I've had enough with your mortals. I'm going to get rid of a lot of them. It's time to finish them all off. I've got plenty of thunderbolts to spare. Um, well, be off with them." And of course, Prometheus said, "No, no, 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 don't do that. I'm sure actually they could be really helpful to you. I tell you what I'll do is I'll ensure now that for every time they do a sacrifice, you will be able to choose exactly what you want and you can get the best. So what I'll do is next time they have a sacrifice, I will divide the meat and I'll put it into two sacks and you can choose the one you want." And so Zeus said, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Yes, I'll go along with that. And great, I won't have to kill any oxes. They'll do all of the sacrifice. That'll be good as long as I get the good bits." So, so of course, at the next sacrifice, Prometheus divided the meat and he made two big bags out of the skin of the ox, and he filled one with all the best cuts of meat, the organ and all organ bits and all the rest of it, and then the top he put the stomach, which is really inedible, the worst bit. And then on with the other one, he put in all the worst bits and pieces, all the horrible stuff. And on the top, he put a couple of the organs. And so, of course, Zeus came down, he saw these two bags and goes, "Oh, well, I'll have that one," picking the one that he thought. And he takes that up and, of course, opens it, and it's all just full of the hooves and the lips, and all the hairy bits. And he's really, really angry. And so he turns around in anger and he shouts to Prometheus. He says, "Well, look, your mortals, they can have their meat, but they'll no longer have fire to cook it." And with that, he took away fire from the mortals. So we no longer had any fire. And so not only wouldn't be unable to cook our food, but we wouldn't be able to keep warm. We'd soon perish and waste away. So Prometheus was rather upset about that. So anyway, but he had a special relationship with Athene, because if you remember, he had birthed Athene from the head of Zeus. And so he said to Athene, "You've got to help me out. Now you're the goddess of wisdom. I'm sure you can come up with an idea here." And she said, "Yeah, I know the back route to Mount Olympus, and I'll sneak you up there, and you can get an ember of the sun and bring it back down to the mortals." So Prometheus said, "It's a great idea." So Athene showed him the back route, and he went up the backside of Mount Olympus. None of the Olympian gods having their feast on the top noticed him coming up behind them. And he got there and he grabbed an ember of the sun and he brought it back down to earth, hidden in a fennel stalk. And he came back down to the mortals and he gave them back fire to cook their meat in a fennel stalk. So once again, we could cook our food because we had fire, which had been given to us in fennel. And when you look at fennel, of course, it's ruled by Mercury. But it's also as a hidden quality. So the manifest qualities, so the main qualities, it's hot and dry. It's hot in the second degree, which is really, really nice and warming. And dry in the first degree, they said. And those were its manifest, its obvious qualities that we could immediately perceive. But its hidden qualities were that it was ruled by Mercury in Virgo. Now, Mercury, of course, is associated with ether and Prometheus, but Virgo, of course, is associated with the stomach and particularly the bowels. So when you think about the fennel, which is a mercurial herb, bringing back fire. Of course, we know that it's a really good digestive herb, that we take it for helping digestion. You know, we give our members of the fennel family, like dill, to babies for colic. Um, so it's a wonderful digestive herb, and it really helps move wind from the bowel. So, of course, that associated with fire, and wind in the bowel was very often, so colic and wind in the bowel was associated with the bowels getting too cold and wet. So there is an example of the astrological qualities, the fennel, but also, of course, it helps the brain as well, because Prometheus is associated forethought, and of course the fire, and going back to what we were talking about, the front of the brain being associated with fire and the apprehension. So fennel was also considered a particularly good herb for the brain, and traditionally was used a lot for all kinds of problems with the brain, and with everything from epilepsy to fainting to confusions, and other kinds of things that may be associated with an excess coldness of the brain. And there's a lovely ending to that whole story. Well, not lovely for Prometheus, because Zeus punished him by chaining him to the Caucasus Mountains, and he got a vulture to peck out his liver for eternity. But then during the day, the liver would regrow. And so the next night he'd have his liver pecked out again. So it'd be eternal punishment for tricking Zeus. But of course, now we know, interestingly, from modern research, that fennel, extracts of fennel, have been shown to be particularly good at helping to regenerate liver tissue. So we've got this wonderful connection of astrology, of mythology, of practical use of herbs, and how it brings it all together. So, and that's really how I got so excited about it, because I was, as a herbalist, you know, I went through a very traditional Western medical herbal training, and I learned all about anatomy and physiology and clinical medicine and chemistry and all of that kind of stuff, and obviously about herbal tradition. But really, within Western herbal medicine, we've lost that connection with, if you like, the story, the narrative of our traditional use. That was broken when the evolution of chemical medicine, with a scientific rationalism in the 1700s, which started to evolve. And really, from that point, you know, medicine moved away from this humoral viewpoint and moved towards chemical medicine and the use of chemicals such as mercury and other strong compounds to treat disease. So we've sort of lost, within the Western tradition, intellectual and academic tradition, any connection with this. So for me, as a young herbalist, I found, you know, after a couple of years, you've been practicing away and doing what you were told and trying to remember it all. And then a point comes, you start to forget it a bit, because you just can't remember everything all the time. Keep going back to your notes. And actually, the thing is, you realize that you know, the world and your patients are always infinite. There'll always be different patients to what you were told about. There'll always be people who present differently to what you may have read a particular herb is for, or been told a herb is for. So what do you do then? How do you move forward? How do you translate the fixed academic ideas of medicine? How do you adapt them to these suddenly, you know, new and unique presentations you're seeing right in front of you with a patient who wants a prescription? How are you going to respond? So that's a big question. And after a couple of years, and you're really starting to forget all those things that clever people told you, and you need to find a way of knowing it for yourself. Many herbalists at that point, Western herbalists, might go and study Chinese medicine, or they might study Ayurvedic medicine, because those traditions, of course, have a narrative of treatment. They say, well, if this person presents like this, well, then you do that. And if that happens, you do this. And then if that, because it talking about cycles, and cycles of health and cycles of disease. And we didn't have that. And then I had this wonderful opportunity. I was actually just finishing my studies, and I went to a really lovely study group in London, organised by some students, and there was a wonderful herbalist there called Dylan Warren Davis, and he wrote a lovely book a long time ago, which I found very useful, called The Hand Reveals, which was about the ancient astrological tradition of chiromancy, hand reading. And of course, it's based on Hermeticism, the Hermetic tradition, astrological symbolism and concepts. And he was giving a lecture on Culpeper, Nicholas Culpeper, who's our sort of most well-known, 17th century herbalist, really the last of our sort of really European group of herbalists who were writing about herbs in the humoral tradition before chemical medicine really sort of overtook the apothecaries and sort of medical mainstream. And Dylan was talking and he said to us all, he said, well, look, do any of you understand what all this planet stuff is in Culpeper? And we all looked a bit like, well, no, not really. Sort of, well, maybe. But tell us, He said, well, it's actually the key. This is the key. This is the key to Culpeper. This is the key to understanding his medicine. And if you can understand this key, you'll open the door on everything that you need to know about medicine and herbs. And so he said, well, look at willow. Let's start with willow. And let's look at willow and Culpeper. And when you look at willow and Culpeper, he says, willow is ruled by the moon. So immediately that tells us that willow is associated with the water element and the phlegmatic humor in the body. The phlegmatic humor rules different parts of the body. In particular, it rules the joints, because the joints known as rheumatics, the word rheum, comes from rio, which Greek means to flow. And of course, we've got this lovely moisture in the joints. So rheumatics as particularly associating joints with water and the phlegmatic humor. So when our joints are hot and swollen, of course, a moon herb, and he said, when you, of course, you look in Culpeper, what he tells you about this herb of the moon is that it is cooling. It's cooling in the second degree and drying in the first. So that means that it's quite cooling. It will really cool quite well when you need to oppose heat, when there's lots of heat, the joints are very hot, particularly if they're swollen. So you can see the sort of hot water in them almost. Then the willow is going to be absolutely perfect. And of course, it's willow, which is known as Salix alba. And of course, we get the word salicylate, and we get aspirin, which is known as acetosalicylic acid, which is a very, very sharp, concentrated aspect of a salicylate. Unlike willow, that's got 17 different salicylate compounds in it, so soft and flowing and going all over the place. So we can immediately see how understanding what Culpeper's saying about it being ruled by the moon and being cooling in the second degree and drying in the first. So he goes on to say, Culpeper goes on to say, it will dry up wounds. So, of course, the drying aspect is the wounds, but also, of course, it will dry up excess swellings in the body. It's also a gentle diuretic. So it has also that sort of drying effect on the body. And then the other interesting thing is that when you look at the moon in the body, and we were talking about the cycles and the astrological relationships of the cycles, moon is associated with the winter, the phlegmatic humor, water is in winter, but of course the winter of our lives. That's the time when we're more prone to these swellings. And actually, willow is what we should all be taking as we get older, because it's the most wonderful anti-inflammatory. And of course, recent research has shown that it's particularly good at protecting against the buildup of atherosclerotic plaques in the circulatory system. So interestingly, it's the moon and water has an association traditionally with the circulatory system, but particularly the venous system. We still use that word Venus, don't we? Because the moon and Venus rule the water element, and that's the watery side of the circulation. So it was seen that, when the venous circulation became excessive, in the same way of getting swelling and all the rest of it, you'd have this herb which would reduce the buildup of heat behind it, which would be causing the pain, but also through having a drying effect would clear it and move it. So it was a lovely example to simply show how, by understanding those simple aspects of those qualities and the symbolic association of a plant, that we immediately knew, just like someone from the 17th century would have known, because most people in the 17th century didn't read and write. Most people, that wasn't their way of communicating ideas, because they weren't analytical, critical thinkers. They hadn't been to university and got a BA and a MA, all that stuff. They hadn't got 5 GCSEs. They got nothing. But they knew the planets. They know the moon. They know the sun. And
And
so,
what they had was the ability to make connections and the ability to, it was a different way of reasoning. And I think that's the thing, is that it was a different way of reasoning. It was a way of seeing the world as a whole,
entirely.
and allowing one part to inform you about another. And I think that that is extremely valuable, um, because it operates on analogy as well. And and I think that then that allows for imagination, and imagination allows for inspiration and
Mm.
intuition. And
Yeah.
so it's a very important thing. And I do love the way that you explain it, because what you are demonstrating is that we can indeed put the heart back um, into herbalism,
Entirely.
because the heart of herbalism is the humoral system. And if we look at the Ayurvedic system, and if we look at traditional Chinese medicine, it's the same principles again
Yeah.
of the humas. And they did not need to rip the heart out in order to be able to practice within their cultures.
Yeah.
Whereas historically, because of the growth of allopathic medicine and particularly pharmaceuticals, herbalists had to develop the perceived version of science, which meant that you rip the heart out of herbalism. So I thank you very much for your time today, because what you have done is you have demonstrated the links between why medical astrology involves the humors, why medical astrology is as relevant today as it has always been, and how it works when you bring in a herbal understanding as well, the connection of the two. So I thank you very much.
Thank you. And if I could just say, if people are interested in my little book,
Your little book is wonderful, and I was about to remind everyone about it. So tell us again the title, please.
yeah, it's called, and I've got my very well thumbed version here. It's called The Humoral Herbal. And you can get it from Aeon Books. And if you do get it within the next month, they've got a special offer on it, a special discount just for you. But you need to just put in the discount code, which I'm sure Anna will share, which is HH, capital H, twice HH, 20. And that will get you 20% off that wonderful book.
Well, I will be putting the link to it in the description box, and
Great, thank
you've
you.
given me the
Great.
code, so I shall be putting that in.
Great, great. And I mean, the thing about it is that in the end, and it's lovely what you said there, because as one of the things I mentioned in the book is this ancient idea of combining the logos, the thinking, analytical, with the mythos, the story, the song, the rhythm, the poem, the imagination, and that brings forth what's called the R's, the art. And it's those three together that bring life back into it. Whereas in our Western tradition, we've taken away, we've just delved into the logos, and that's it. We've battened the doors down, and we're not going to leave. So it's time that we open those doors and that we set it free so that it can dance once again with the mythos, and together we can practice the art of life and living and celebrate, this wonderful cosmos that we all share and all the beings within it.
Well, given the disaster that is being experienced by all who are um, seeking help from the conventional system, it might be worth considering putting some heart back into medicine. So
Definitely.
I'll be putting a link to this book in the description box along with the discount code. But if people want to find you and have help from you, Steve, how do they do that?
Yeah, the best thing is you probably find if you put Steve Taylor herbalist into search and I'll pop up. I actually practice from Chichester in West Sussex is where my practice is. I do online consultations as well. And I have a website which is medicinegarden.co.uk. And everything about me, all my contact details are on there.
How can anyone
Hopefully, you'll
resist?
find that website easily.
How can anyone resist a website entitled Medicine Garden? That's absolutely wonderful. Thank
Yeah,
you. I'll
thank
be
you very
putting a
much.
link to that in the description box as well. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we'll be looking at astrological counseling. And do remember that in the description box, you will also find a link to my Substack. Until next time, goodbye.